In 2017, the Black Bear Film Festival was honored to share some special moments and the journey of one of Hollywood's iconic golden boys, Tab Hunter. With over 40 movies under his belt, this Academy-nominated actor and singer was in 4 words: passionate, professional, personable, and private.
Tab, when I was young, he just was amazing looking. Beautiful California surfer that every single girl or boy would want to make out with.
Mr. Tab Hunter.
He was the embodiment of youthful American masculinity.
He was as big as they could come.
Are you Tab Hunter?
Yeah.
I think I've died and gone to heaven.
It's of such obvious value. A first-hand account of mid-century Hollywood, end of the studio system movie making, as well as a personal account of gay American history. So it has the feeling of one seamless 90-minute conversation with you. Now we see your shirt changing, so we know it's not one day.
7 years worth of...
So it has that wonderful feeling of we just captured you for 90 minutes just telling the whole story in one stretch.
It was a 7-year process. 5 of those years was trying to talk Tab into doing it. He did not want to do it. I mean, you know, he's a very private person, and he doesn't like to talk about himself, number one, and the very last thing he wants to do is talk about his sexuality in a film, in any of that. It's something, you know, he was born in 1931, he was raised in a different era, you didn't talk about those things.
See, I think people place too much emphasis on that. Today, it's all kind of, everything is blah, blah, blah in your face. And I'm just so conservative about my feelings that, you know, that's really only a thread in the tapestry of your life.
Sure.
So, because there's a whole life there. And our lives are very important. The journey that we're all on is very important. Yes, it's important to be able to discuss these things, but it's very difficult for some people to. But basically, it's all about the journey and being thankful. You know, Hollywood, like everything, people label people. And, you know, people are always labeling people, whether it be in a role that you're doing or this or that. And, you know, people say, oh, she's this kind of a woman, or he's that kind of a person. And the first line in my book was, I hate labels. Because people are always labeling us. But even in your work, people want to put you in one position. If you're successful in that role, that's the role they'll give you and nothing else. So it's hard to break that image.
You know, I thought it was important to explore what was it like, what Hollywood was like back then. Sure.
That's such a good point because it's a whole different era that people know nothing about. I miss the kind of more intimate type of filmmaking, and we do occasionally get it today. Sure. And when we see it, I find it so refreshing. But there was a mystery about the movies that I loved.
Sure.
And they were almost untouchable.
Back then, this is how different the world's changed. If you had a secret, they would keep your secret. The movie magazines would keep the secret for you to help your image with the studio. Now, the first thing they want to do is any secrets you have is put it on the internet.
Well, at the studio, for example, if you said something about one of their stars, the studio would never allow you to get back on the lot, period. You were through. I mean, there were the big gossip people in those days were Luella Parsons, Hedda Hopper, people like that. A couple people in New York, but no, it was you know, they protected you. The studio was there they were there to build your career, and you did what they asked you to do. And if you couldn't do what they asked you to do, you'd be out, and they'd bring someone else in who could. It was a job. So do it to the best of your ability, or get the hell out and let someone else who in there who will do it. I think the person that helped me the most was my agent, Dick Clayton, because he was part of my family. And he was the one who said, work, 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 you've got to keep working, you've got to improve. He introduced me to Jeff Corey, who I worked with, who was brilliant. And of course you learn from everyone you work with. Van Heflin, Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire is without a doubt one of the most stylish people and one of the true gentlemen of the business. I love Fred. When we worked on the film, we talked horses a lot. He had racehorses. And he's just an incredible human being. And when I think of Fred, I think of a word that's gone out the window, and that's style. He had a style like no one, and he was just a very, very, very uncomplicated, not pretentious, very simple person. I was very, very impressed by him. I will tell you, I was doing, they came to Cordura with Gary Cooper and Rita Hayworth, and Bob Rawson came up and he said, Ted, I've got a really good script that I'd like you to read. I think you might enjoy it. It's about a pool player, a pool shark. It was called The Hustler. And I said, I hate pool. What an idiot. I said, I'm the lousiest pool shark in the world. And I blew it right then. My favorite story on Coop was one day it was overcast. And we needed sunlight for this scene. We were out beyond Las Vegas in the middle of nowhere. And all of a sudden, he just, as Coop did, he just stood up and went, and yawned, and the assistant director said, wrap, it's a wrap, no more shooting today. So we're riding back in the limo to the hotel. And Coop said, I wonder why we wrapped so early. I said, Coop, you did it yourself. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, all you had to do was stand up and stretch, and they said, it's a wrap. And he said, well, it is the last day of pheasant hunting. It's always a pleasure to see people like Debbie Reynolds. I mean, my gosh, I knew Debbie when she was just out of the Burbank High School playing the French horn in the band. And then Warner Brothers put her under contract and dropped her, and they were fools because MGM picked her up and made a major star for her. And on her first big paycheck, she lived in Burbank in a little house, and her first major paycheck, she went and had a swimming pool put just in the back, and it just fit in the backyard. So you'd open the screen door from the kitchen and fall in the pool. And we used to play baseball with her mother's biscuits. They were so hard. She was terrific gal. Very, very out there, a lot of fun. And I'll never forget, I used to go to the beach in Santa Monica, and I'd lie out, it was close to Zadok's house on the beach, and I'll never forget, I'm lying there in the sun, and I look around and I see Lana Turner and Tyrone Power running out to the ocean to take a swim. I never forgot that. Wow. And years later in the Sea Chase, I did work with Lana. Yes. And I said the stupidest thing in the world to her. She came out we were working on a ship in Kealakekua Bay, Hawaii. And I said, someone said, oh, Lana, this is Tab Hunter. He's been dying to meet you, as you can tell by his attitude all morning. And I said, well, I've been a fan of yours since I was a kid. And then I realized what an idiot I was. So that night, in the dining room at the hotel, she came in and sat down, and I had a wonderful Hawaiian gal that strung little plumeria lace for me, beautiful. So I walked over to Lana and I said, Lana, I'd like to give you your first lay in Hawaii. Battle Cry was a really important movie for me because it kind of put me in my first big movie. And that was Leon Uris's first novel. That was a terrific film to be a part of. Aldo Ray, Dorothy Malone, directed by Raoul Walsh, Blood and Guts Raoul Walsh. I mean, some incredible people. Van Heflin, who I did 3 films with. I mean, it's wonderful to be a part of that and be able to work with people like that, because that's where you learn. If anything, what not to do again next time. But thank you. People always say, gee, Tab, my mother was a big fan of yours. And, great, I love it. Of course, she was only this big at the time.
We have to ask you about Sophia Loren.
Well, I love Sophia. I was on a loan out from from Warner Brothers to Paramount. And Sidney Lumet wanted to meet with me as well as Sophia and Carlo. So I went over there. They said, okay. I said, thank God. And then we shot in New York. Because Sidney did a lot of stuff in New York. And it was a hot, hot summer. And Sophia was in her limousine Cadillac, air-conditioned. And it was so wonderful sitting in the limo with her, listening to our song that we shared at that time. It was Bobby Darin's Splish Splash, I Was Taking a Bath. And that was our song. She loved rock and roll.
I feel like there's been a resurgence of interest in Natalie Wood, and so of course you shared the two films and the friendship. So anything
The wonderful
else?
thing about Natalie is she had started out as a very young child in films. You know, Miracle on 34th Street and some of those great films. But Natalie was at that age where she was like a colt finding its legs. She was a young girl and she was a young woman, and she was at that immature, mature stage, which I found delightful. It was absolutely embracing. You just wanted to put your arms around her and hug her. She was terrific.
Natalie was only 17 when they did the Burning Hills.
And I was
You were like 24. And yeah, I mean, it was, they were kids.
Well, Warner Brothers sent me around the country to 26 cities to promote the Spirit of St. Louis. Well, I wasn't even in it. And we all know from history that the plane landed safely. So the only thing about the picture was Jimmy Stewart, who was fabulous, and a fly in the cockpit. And that was it. But every place I'd go, I just cut my record, Young Love. So people would say, yeah, but tell us about the record. And Jack Warner was not happy about that.
And around that time was West Side Story, and you'd had a wonderful rapport with Natalie Wood. You could have done all of your own singing, and you were more physically right for it than the fellow who played it. Was there any serious talk about you playing Tony in West Side Story?
Well, I did have a meeting with Robert Wise, but he didn't want me. So I got a chance to do West Side Story in the theater a number of years later at Meadowbrook with a lot of the original cast from Broadway, and that was very exciting.
Not only are you part of that sort of last gasp of the golden age of Hollywood, but you're also part of the golden age of television with the live productions, because that all stopped, you know.
Well, live TV was amazing. And remember all those great shows, I mean, the variety shows. You know, Dinah Shore, Pat Boone, Jimmy Stewart, you go on, I mean, Jimmy Durante, you could go on and on. And I just loved all those shows. You know, Ed Sullivan.
Oh, yeah.
Who can forget that?
So, Alan, do you have another documentary in the works, or what's going on?
Well, actually, not another documentary, but I did sell this documentary to J.J. Abrams, you know, who does Star Trek, and we're turning it into a feature film. So that's in development right now, and the section of the movie that most fascinated him was Tab and Tony's Perkins relationship in the 1950s. So that's, you know, and Tab's mother is in it with her relationship in the middle of all that going on.
My mother was a really complex, but very interesting. But I'll never forget one thing late in life. She was sitting there, and she, out of the blue, she said to me, "Was I that difficult when you were growing up?" Well, how the hell do you respond to that? I said, well, let's put it this way. If you'd been on the drugs 40 years ago that you're on today, we'd have had a great relationship. She was really very dear. She said, I love you very much.
So, is there any chance you could be lured back to an acting role?
No.
You said that, but I thought, I don't know, maybe. No,
he absolutely has no interest. That's the other fascinating thing that I find is somebody, you know, he was getting tons of offers when I first knew him. He turned everything down. He just walked away from it and was never lured back, was never tempted, and just stayed away. And like I said, it was so difficult. The only reason why he did the book initially is that I found out somebody was going to be writing an unauthorized biography on Tab.
Well, I loved it. Alan told me, he said, I think you should write a book. I said, what? He said, no, I think you should do a book. He said, I hear someone else is going to be doing one, and I think you should do it. And you know, I thought about it, and I thought, you know, get it from the horse's mouth, not from some horse's ass after I'm dead and gone. Because after you're dead and gone, they'll sure as hell put a spin on your life. It has nothing to do with you. It's basically a journey, a person's journey. And I've said this before, but we are all on a journey. And we've got to be aware of it. And we've got to be thankful of it. And that's really basically what it is. Mm-hmm. It's a journey, and I'm thankful. And we're all on a journey, and I hope you're all thankful.
Well, I think that's a beautiful place to end it. So thank you, Alan. Thank you, Tab. Thank you for being here on opening night.